Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And thank you for letting us come and make this update about undergrounding to you. As you know, it's a very important project. It's an expensive project. And there's lots of information out there that people have that is accurate or inaccurate. So our goal is to try to clarify things as best we can and to allow you to answer or to ask any questions that you may have. I'm not very good with this thing, but is it hard? Should we dim the light a little bit? There we go. Okay, so as Ned alluded to, we have an underground utilities task force. And Jeff Smith, who spoke to, I guess, your board of directors recently, is chair of that task force, and Donald Gobranson is vice chair. Dennis Boderoff, Tony, and Susan, who were introduced earlier, Tom Parker, and Harry Woolen. They started working probably in the latter part of, or the early part of 2015 to look at all of the different aspects of undergrounding. And I'll get into what their tasks and the decisions that they had made later. Of course, this is the management team that's working on it is Kimley Horn, which is Kevin here on my left, Patricia, who is the town engineer, Paul Brazil, Jane Struder is finance, and then Jay Budishwar, deputy town manager. Let's start with the history. So in April of 2014, FPL came to the town and said, hey town, the Florida Public Service Commission has mandated that per their adopted storm secure plan that their facilities had to be hardened. And if you look on your power bill, which is usually a very boring thing to do, but if you look at your power bill, you'll see a little line item on there that says storm secure. And in my case, it varies depending on how much power I use, but sometimes it's $3, $4, $2. That charge is throughout the FPL system, and it is to pay for hardening. Hardening basically means larger, taller concrete poles that are designed to withstand winds of up to 145 miles per hour. The FPL said that they had about 6, 7, maybe 8 what they call trunk lines that they had to, per that plan, that they had to harden. And we have maps that we can show you, but I don't think they're part of today. But basically, they run along the spine of the arterial roadways, such as North Lake Boulevard, North Ocean Boulevard, South County Road, and other roads like that, mainly where the lines come under the intercoastal and up to the island where service is provided to the homes. The town council received that first information in April 2014. They did not like what they heard, and they told them to come back in October, and they presented once again, and it was at that juncture where the mayor and town council decided Palm Beach is not going to accept hardening, that it was too aesthetically unacceptable, that it looked industrial and or commercial, and it was not in keeping with the aesthetic sensibilities of the town of Palm Beach. And the only other alternative to hardening is undergrounding. And undergrounding has specific tariffs and rules that go with it that I can get into if you want to later on. But long story short, they said no to hardening, and off we went for undergrounding. That's when the task force really got down to business, and they started to look at all of the nuances associated with it, the tariffs that go with it, and led up to work that they had to do in order to have the referendum that was decided in March of 2016 to provide financing of up to $90 million for general obligation bonds to be paid for with special non-ad valorem assessments. So a couple of tidbits that you should know is that FPL offers a 25% discount for municipalities that bury their entire city. So those numbers that you heard me say earlier include the 25% discount. I'll mention later that we don't think that that's sufficient, and I'll tell you why. You heard about, I already told you about the financing, and the voters approved the financing by, an overwhelming margin of 62 votes in March of 2016. And so immediately thereafter, we began the master planning process. Kimley Horn was selected to do the master plan, and that's sort of where we are today relative to what's going to be presented next month to the task force, is wrapping up that. The primary benefits of undergrounding are aesthetics, everybody knows that, safety, and reliability. This, just to hit reliability first, FPL's own data on the Public Service Commission website shows that underground facilities are more reliable in their system than overhead facilities. Secondly is safety. For the last 12 to 15 years, the town has averaged once a week having either a sparking, down power lines, or fires associated with the distribution system that serves the town of Palm Beach. I call it a third world system. I've studied it. I've looked at different places across the country and in Europe as well, and this is really antiquated. That's serving the people of Palm Beach. So that's very important to get it updated. Here's some facts about undergrounding. I told you about the reliability. When we do this, on average, about 1 out of every 4 single-family homes has to have a transformer placed on its property. Typically, if you were standing in your backyard and you looked at the lines along the easement in the rear, if you see a transformer, that's that metal can that would be on a pole, you have about a 50% chance that you're going to end up getting a transformer on your property. That's just an FYI. But the point that I brought it up for is that we landscape it so that it's not seen from the roadway, and it's you don't have to look at the green box. But typically the box is about 3 by 4 feet on a 6-inch concrete pad. The other important tidbits are, once the utilities are built, converted, and accepted by FPL and Comcast and AT&T, they don't belong to you. They don't belong to the town. They belong to the utility companies, and it's their infrastructure that they have to maintain and replace in perpetuity. You're not responsible for it at all. That's just the way the system works. We pay to make the switcheroo, but it becomes their property, and they maintain it, and they replace it as needed going forward. The underground utility lines are waterproof. All of the lines that come to the town are under the intercoastal waterway, so that's kind of like a big hint that they're waterproof right off the bat. The underground lines are designed to withstand the coastal environment exposure that we have. There's already over 30 miles of underground lines in the town of Palm Beach, and there's already 380 pad-mounted transformers in the town. So we're really just talking about doing the remainder of the system. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. The last thing I wanted to say was, just as something I learned in the last couple of weeks, is that FPL calls themselves an overhead utility because that's their standard form of service. But you'll be surprised probably to learn that the majority of their system is now undergrounded in their system-wide. And if you think about it, it started about in the late 70s after 1975. You would be very, very hard-pressed to think of a subdivision or a new commercial building that got built since 1975 that actually was serviced with overhead lines. The standard in the United States for new development is underground utilities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin, and he'll tell you more about the master plan.
Thanks, Tom. Like Tom said, I'm going to hit the highlights of the master plan today. Right now, we're wrapping it up. We're wrapping up the process. We're going to be speaking and giving a presentation of the overall master plan, much more in depth, next week at the underground task force meeting on Tuesday. So we completed the draft of the master plan in about 7 months. Working together as a team, we were able to streamline this process and compress the schedule. This is a program of this magnitude would typically take about 18 months to plan out. We conducted numerous meetings with residents, stakeholders, utilities, government and other governmental agencies, including the town. More than 100 people collaborated to make the overall process happen. Last month, the town council did approve a peer review process to be conducted as part of the master plan, and so the town's currently in a process of selecting a consultant to do that review. Also, on recommendation of the task force and the town council, we finalized negotiations last week with our 2 construction managers for pre-construction services of Phase 1. This is the first step in the development of a guaranteed maximum price for Phase 1. So now I want to take some time to discuss the project phasing. The program is broken into 8 phases. Each one of these phases is then further broken into 2 sub-phases. For example, in Phase 1, we have a north phase and we have a south phase. Phase 1 north is Onondaga all the way to the inlet, and Phase 1 south is Sloan's Curve all the way south to the southern town limits. Each phase has a construction duration of approximately 18 to 24 months. When we were developing the limits of each phase, there were a number of factors that we had to consider. First, there's technical requirements from the utilities. For example, Comcast has service areas for all of their fiber optic nodes all over town. In order to maintain some smooth transitions during the service swap over process, that's after we get the equipment installed and energized, and we're converting your home from an overhead system to the underground system, we needed to stay within the existing service boundaries of those Comcast fiber nodes as best we could. By doing that, we were able to avoid the need to perform a lot of new programming for individual internet and TV service connections. That programming could extend to people that live in places that are not even in the current phase under construction. So by keeping the existing service boundaries, we're able to reduce the technical complexity of the project as well as the cost. This is why the phase lines, when I show you the maps in a moment here, they look more like gerrymandered congressional districts than they do look like straight cuts across the island. We also desire that the sequencing of the phases minimize the community and traffic impacts to the greatest extent that we can by moving from the extreme north and south of the town and work our way towards the center. We impact the fewest people for the least amount of time, and I'll demonstrate this in a moment as I animate the progression of the sequences here on the maps. We want the project to be cost efficient. Everybody does. Some of the phase boundaries are drawn in areas where we already have transitions from the overhead system to the underground system. For example, on the north and south sides of the Palm Beach Country Club, the lines transition from overhead to underground at that particular area. So therefore, the club was a natural location for us to draw a phase line. This prevents the need for us to install new transition poles to allow that underground overhead transition to occur in between the phases. Not installing transition poles and making those connections saves money, it saves time, and it saves coordination with the utilities. We also want to complete this project as quickly as possible. There's a little bit of schedule overlap between adjacent phases. This is done in an effort to compress the schedule so that we can complete the program as quickly as we can. Our plan is that once the heavily impactful conduit installation process is complete in one phase, and the contractor's wrapping up their equipment installation and moving into the pole removal stage, we'll be comfortable starting conduit installation in the subsequent phase. This way, we're able to effectively coordinate and minimize the community impacts. And having this overlap ultimately allows us to have 4 sub-phases all going on at the same time, which reduces the overall program duration. We've also planned and considered other infrastructure improvement programs within our plans for undergrounding. This allows us to complete a number of other infrastructure projects for both the town and for other utility companies like the water and the gas companies. For example, on the Nightingale and La Puerta project, we were able to coordinate drainage improvements, water main work, and gas line replacement all within the same construction project. This additional level of coordination minimizes the minimizes the amount of disturbance that may occur in the future after undergrounding is complete. And so now I want to take you through the overall phasing schedule. So this is an overall map of the phasing plan. As you can see, we have eight phases with construction start dates that start anywhere between 2017 and 2024. Phase 1 south, where we're starting this year, is here, and phase 1 north is up here. So we're at the very far north and south ends of the island. So phase 1 we anticipate to start this year. We're ready to go by mid-June, barring any lawsuit or financing hiccups. So phase 2, you see how we're starting to march towards the center of the town. Phase 3. And phase 4, in 2020, we reached the southern part of Midtown. I want to point out that until this point, there have been no impacts due to this program between the Middle Bridge and Via Marilla. So this area here, we've not done any work on undergrounding. And this provides the town with a much needed break in the traffic impacts that are still occurring as a result of the North Bridge. In phase 5, our phasing leapfrogs from Via Marilla down to the south side of the country club. This is being done in an effort to create the space needed to avoid having one gigantic super construction area at the end of our program as we reach the geographic center of town. This reduces the community and the traffic impacts and allows us to stay true to our master plan guidelines in that we do not want to have two adjacent phases experiencing heavy underground work at the same time. Phase 6 in 2022, you'll see our active phases are separated by 2 phase areas here in the center. This is as close as we're ever going to get to having 2 areas of heavy impact close to each other. In phase 7, we leapfrog back north of the Palm Beach Country Club, and then we jump over the North Bridge to this area. And then the program wraps up with phase 8 just north of the Flagler Bridge. Phase 8 will start as you see, in the summer of 2024, and it's scheduled to be wrapped up by the spring of 2026.
What the north and south boundaries?
The north of phase 8?
Yeah.
Generally, it is Royal Poinciana, and it kind of meanders a little bit, but this is Dunbar right here.
Oh,
So Poinciana to Dunbar in general.
that's the last section.
That's the last section. So now I want to talk a little bit about the transportation management plan. As we just discussed, the management of traffic and community impacts weighed heavily in how we sequence the overall program phases. So now I want to talk a little bit more in detail about how we're managing traffic during construction. In the master plan, we've developed a transportation management plan that lays out guidelines for the implementation of the maintenance of traffic throughout the program. We've identified all the current programs of improvement that are going to occur over the next 5 to 10 years and located them on a series of maps. This graphic here is just a small snippet of maps that we have developed for every single phase of the program throughout the entire island. So we categorized every street in town with regards to that street's ability to be used as a detour route during construction. Some streets are good for 2-way detours, some are good for 1-way detours, and others are never good for a detour. This classification is largely based on the street width, the level of on-street parking that exists, and whether or not it's a 1-way street or a dead-end street. We've also set some hard and fast ground rules, like the major north-south arterials, like North Lakeway, North Ocean, can never be entirely shut down. And then parallel north-south streets, such as the same North Lakeway, North Ocean, they can never be impacted at the same time. We've implemented and experimented with some of these rules on the Nightingale and La Puerta project, and they've performed quite well. We've worked out some kinks by doing some of that experimentation, and we're feeling good about how it's going to operate moving forward. The Transportation and Management Plan also recommends the communication protocols about how we communicate road closures or lane closures, lane impacts, road work, how we communicate that to the community, how we communicate that to the town, how we develop working hour restrictions, coordination with special events, providing access for emergency services and emergency response, and then also some of those activities that may require special approval from the town or the FDOT, depending on what road we're working on. And we even make recommendations on how to deal with traffic through the work zone when President Trump is in town.
Wow.
So I'm sure you've all read in the paper, seen the news, that the program costs are currently at $98.6 million. The cost is broken down into a series of components. Those are the percentages of each one of those components. As you can see, the largest of those components include the FPL, AT&T, and Comcast conversion costs, along with the restoration costs. These costs account for all the conduit, the equipment, the cable installation, pole removal, along with fixing the roads and restoring the landscaping that is disturbed in the process. We're continuously looking for ways to reduce the cost of the program. This includes discussions with FPL, Comcast, and AT&T regarding how they may contribute to the program at a higher level. Tom, along with the mayor, are working very hard with FPL to get more than just a 25% discount based on some of the operational issues and fire department calls that have been pointed out with the existing overhead system, like Tom described earlier today. We've been working with the utilities to reuse as much of the existing underground infrastructure as possible to reduce those costs. You may have heard about a broadband request for information, the RFI. We've received the responses from that RFI, and we're currently reviewing and analyzing those results. New broadband service providers present an opportunity for partnership with the program to reduce capital costs and identify new revenue sources to offset program costs. Those of you who regularly attend the Underground Task Force meetings or listen online hear me regularly talk about saves and raves. We're constantly chipping away at the program costs. Some months are bigger than others, but we're always chipping away. Oops. There we go. Sorry about that. Back to Tom.
Yeah, so let me try to wrap things up. So the status is that the final master plan will be presented to the Underground Task Force on, I think it's April 4th.
Yep.
Kevin mentioned that the peer review has been approved, and thank you to the Civic Association for agreeing to fund a portion of that. I should be able this week to send the draft scope of work to Ned, to let Ned take a look at it and see if he thinks it covers all the bases that the Civic Association is interested in. The detailed design for Phase 1 is wrapping up. The permitting is underway. The easement acquisition process is underway. We're working diligently on both the north and south ends of town to secure the easements. So far, every easement has been donated to the town. We have never paid for an easement. We work and bend over backwards to accommodate the property needs of the property owners, so that they can deal with it in an acceptable manner to them. The construction managers for each of those two phases of Phase 1 that Kevin mentioned have been selected. They are actually working on the pre-construction services agreements right now. The next phase will be the creation of the guaranteed maximum price for the project that they would do. That would be in June. The binding cost estimate from FPL is also anticipated to be ready to present to the town council in June, and I can't read my own writing. It says, lastly, I wanted you to know that we do have an opening on the Underground Utility Task Force, Anybody that's interested now's the time to send in your application for membership, and the council will be making that appointment one seat. It's Wilbur Ross's seat. As you all know, Wilbur became the Secretary of Commerce and had to give up his most important seat with the task force in order to do that. So we're looking for a new member. Briefly, some of the challenges that we have, and just in wrapping things up, was we do have 2 lawsuits. Those lawsuits, they're not really problematic, except that they do not allow us to access the financing that was approved by the voters on March of 2016, but we do have every other means of financing available to us, including lines of credit, and those are actively being studied right now in order to make recommendations per the request of the task force to possibly be considered and approved by town council. We'll see about that. And then, as Kevin mentioned, because of the cost overrun and my desire to try to reduce that cost, we are about 6 weeks behind schedule. So the earliest we could start the project would be June, as opposed to our original plan, which was May 1st. And then last but not least, we ask that you feel free to ask any questions. We have a traveling road show to make presentations to anybody. This is my second one this week already. Sign up for the emails and information on our website so that you can get all the latest alerts and or news releases that we send out. And there's the contact information on the screen. And then now the most important part of the meeting is your questions. All right, raise your hand.
There's one right here.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Bradford, looking at the scale, we're in the south end, so that's Zone 8, if I'm correct. And that project is due to begin when? In June of this year? Or
Are you
before?
south of Sloan's?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so about June?
June, yes.
Okay.
That's the current schedule.
All right. The power lines that are parallel to South County, is the undergrounding going to be directly below those power lines where they are in place at this time?
Probably not, but Kevin should answer that.
Yes, Kevin.
When you talk about South County,
Yeah.
are you talking about A1A down in where south of Sloan's
South.
Curve?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
they're not directly below because we need to keep the overhead intact while we construct the new
Sure.
underground. So they're offset a little bit, but in general they follow those paths.
I see.
Kevin, when you say offset a little bit, offset roadside or offset?
Offset roadside because the poles are right up on the right-of-way property line. So we're towards the road with the conduits. Thank you, Tony.
I have two,
Well, let's let this lady shut.
thank you. I have two issues.
Not in my book.
I'm on a lake. I mean, I'm built on top of Phil. The land that I was on was not land, it was a lake. It's woods. Well, it's Woods Landing.
Yes, okay.
Okay, what happens with the undergrounding at that point? Is that we, it's mush. There's nothing, there's water there. I mean, I have a swimming pool. If I empty the swimming pool, it could come up on me. So how are they doing figuring that out? Is that gonna be taken care of, and how is it
Yes.
gonna be taken?
So
care of?
basically you're saying that the property that you have is built on what we call muck?
We're on piling, we have pilings.
You have pilings because of substandard soils, is that right?
That's right.
I don't think the project is affected by that at all. Kevin, you wanna?
Yeah, we generally use very flexible conduits, and when we have poor soils conditions, there's engineering solutions to amend that so that everything's stable and doesn't settle.
You feel that it won't have any more problems than anybody else?
Right. Yeah, we have to put the infrastructure in such that it will be stable and won't settle. But that's experience that we have, and we're able to do that.
And are you, but I understand once the power goes out there, that, on anybody's property, it will take longer to fix than just what they do now, maybe a few hours or a day or something like that.
It just depends on the nature of the problem, and that's not necessarily
Because,
true.
you know, that's the story I'm hearing, that it will take forever, you know.
No.
That's not
Today, I mean, historically,
Yeah.
that is a true statement, that undergrounding has less outages, but may take longer to fix.
repair, yeah.
However, there are new technologies today that have recently come on the market, such as, I don't know, is it called radar? Is that what it's called?
LiDAR.
They have tools where they can now see where the breaks are underlying and get to it really quick. So it's a different circumstance today than historically.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that it's like being under the intracoastal,
Yes.
okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
But I'm sure they know that that's the land.
I guess
Right.
with the newer system also, we have all the existing as-built. There's switch cabinets and ways that they isolate the problem very quickly. It's a lot different than 30 years ago, or even looking at a 30-year-old system. So,
And one more question. Am I correct in assuming that all the overhead poles will be gone on the entire island? The north and south and east and west streets?
Yes, ma'am.
Both, okay,
All,
everything.
okay, let's go. Yes, sir.
Out of a sense of full disclosure, the second photo you had there about the fire was at my condo.
Oh, it was?
Oh.
Okay.
It was very destructive and very frightening.
Okay.
So I just want to say that. My question is this, you said the utility boxes are going to be 3x4. What size are they going to be for the condos?
Well, Kevin, you correct me if I'm wrong. Typically, the condominiums all have a transformer in the building somewhere. Typically, it's called the electric room or something like that. But in a few cases, in the south end, in the condo areas, we do need to add or provide a transformer. The size depends. I don't know, whether it's 3-phase or 2-phase, I guess it's called, or 1-phase is
Yeah.
low boy. But there's also switch cabinets, and there are a number of switch cabinets on the south end of town. And so far, in our meetings with the property owners or their representatives, that most of we have on South Ocean Boulevard, we have enough right-of-way, unpaved right-of-way, to provide these boxes in the right-of-way. Most of the condominiums that we're meeting with relative to easements, when we tell them that we have that option, they want us to find a way to integrate it with their landscaping so that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. But even if we do put it in the unpaved portion of the right-of-way, we will landscape it so that it's completely screened.
So how large is it going to be?
It's
Talking switch cabinets?
Switch
Switch cabinets are about 6x6.
6x6?
Yeah,
And
footprint.
how tall?
They're about, the standard ones I think are 53 inches. Yeah.
Plus a pad.
Yeah, plus a 6-inch pad.
okay. I'm going to keep going clockwise. Question. Yes, sir.
Thank you both for your presentation. Because of unknown factors like inflation, it's a real challenge to estimate the cost of any 10-year project. What does the town do if the actual costs exceed the estimate?
Well, we have a number of options, but if you noticed in his presentation about the cost, he does have the inflation factor in that number. It was 9 million and change. There is that, but that doesn't
Comes
guarantee.
without a guarantee.
Right, it's no guarantee. So we have the option of stopping or securing funding from alternative sources to complete the work for the overage amount that may occur.
Hopefully it won't happen, but stopping certainly can't be an acceptable
It
option.
would be very unacceptable to the people that didn't get the underground. Yeah. So it's not really a good option.
$100 million
Yeah.
to take care of everything, and I'm sure he will do that.
What
Somebody
kind
has
of-
to start it.
What kind of alternative
Oh, really?
financing could this, hopefully it won't happen, but you always need to know about Plan B.
Yes.
What could the town do if that did occur?
Well, we could use reserves. We could use what's called revenue bonds. We could use special assessment bonds, and there's one other that I'm forgetting, but we have about 4 other financing options.
So the point is it will happen. It
The,
will happen.
the project?
Yeah, the project will happen.
We'll have to ask people like Bobby Lynn. The town council decides whether it's going to happen, but it's capable of
Did Bobby
happening.
come in? Is Bobby here?
Yes.
Hi, Bobby, I'd like to introduce you. You all know Bobby Lindsay, our town council
Yeah.
person.
Hey, Bobby. So going, but yes,
I
Bob.
just wanted you to comment on one quick thing. This is mostly not for condominiums, but for the 25% of the people who end up with a box, and I volunteered for one, I would like your comment on the abandonment of the easement that they do have and how there's a net gain in your
Yes.
property.
Okay.
Please comment on that.
Yeah, so the typical single-family home in Palm Beach is about 100 by 100 or 10,000 square feet. It's actually a little less than that, but just for discussion purposes, let's say that that's true. So in that circumstance, you've got 100 feet of backyard that runs up against the rear yard easement. And the typical scenario in easements is that your property granted a 2.5 foot easement, and your neighbor to the south or north of you granted a 2.5, so you have 5 feet total of easement. If there is no sanitary sewer or no water or gas line in that easement, we will abandon it through a public hearing process. And so the property owner gets full effective use of that 2.5 feet along that 100-foot stretch. So the jungle that may be there today, or the desire that you had to landscape it over the years, that will now be available to you to use as fully and freely as if it did not have an encumbrance like an easement on it.
Does it add to our title?
No, today it's construed for zoning and other purposes. That easement is technically your land, and it counts for your total square footage and so forth. So it doesn't affect title in any way whatsoever.
But it does affect where you can put your fence.
Your
or,
fence.
things like that. And
Right.
So it effectively improves your, the depth of your lot typically. Right, 2.5 feet by 100, so 250
Mr.
feet. I
Mr.
gave up 30,
Frank.
but I got actually almost to 80, so it was a net gain.
One question, well, a couple of questions, but if this goes down for some reason, whatever calamity, we find out we can't do it or whatever, I don't think that's gonna happen. But if we didn't do this, what would happen? What would Florida Power and Light do?
They have to do the hardening, so they would convert the 6 to 10 places that is escaping me at the moment where they're exactly located, but that would have to be hardened with the bigger, taller.
Now, would they go
Pole.
down just the main arteries, or would they go down side streets also?
They do go down a couple or maybe a few side streets. I think Barton is one, Onondaga is another.
So in other words, you wouldn't have the same system, because some of the homes on the streets they didn't go down would not have hardened lines.
There would
Correct.
still be wooden poles, you're saying?
Yeah,
In most-
right.
in most
So
cases.
There
that's
still
a,
would be wooden poles.
that's a very good point. So even if they harden, the overwhelming majority of the rear yard easements in this town would still be the rickety wooden poles with vines and so forth growing all over the place. Yes.
All right, in this right away where you're going to put shrubbery in, who will maintain that in the future? Has that been decided or discussed?
Typically, the game plan would be for an easement that's on private property, the property owner has to maintain it, just
But
like
you
it
would put in the initial
we
shrubbery.
we put it in initially, yes.
All right, thank you. One more.
Yeah.
You talk about core drilling. In your opinion, Kevin, are we going to, would a greater majority or a lesser majority of the work be done with core drilling rather than tearing up the roads? Or can you give me a fast? These are questions that people have asked.
Right, and we're leaving that method decision up to our contractor in individual phases to decide what's going to be the quickest and least costly way to do that. When we did our master plan and developed our costs, based on the information we have and the analysis that we performed, open cut trenching is less costly than coring. And so our estimates are based on open trenching.
Thank you.
Yes, Roberta.
Is there, noise emitting from this, apparatus that you've placed there?
No, no noise. No noise. Going clockwise, yes, ma'am.
Something that hasn't been spoken to in all of our discussions, which is irrelevant at this point since we're here. When Marshall McDonald was president of Florida Power and Light, they maintained the trees in our backyard. When Mr. Broadhead came to give us better income, and we got income from Florida Plunder and Loot, they stopped doing that. So some of your fires, I assume, and some of your problems are the fact that Florida Power and Light didn't give us the kind of service they should have. And maybe you could tell them that they
Yeah.
owe us more because we have.
Yes.
Good point.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, it's actually worse. The circumstance today is actually worse than it used to be because in that storm secure plan I told you about, it's on your power bill. A component of that is the vegetative maintenance
Yes.
plan, and they don't really do it, even though they charge for it.
Until, Marshall McDonald, who was our resident, was no longer president of Florida Power and Light. The other question I have is that now we're at 98 point whatever million, but to get there, you did some creative things. The most egregious is taking $12.8 million for the milling of the roads from one budget and put it in another, and I'm sure there must be some amelioration that you might explain to me, so I won't find it
So discouraged.
unfair.
Okay, yes. Well, first of all, if it stayed, your assessment would be higher. Number two, by putting it in the capital improvement plan as opposed to the assessment plan for the undergrounding, I'm putting it where it would historically have been in the first place and where we actually have the money to do it. I don't think part of my reason for doing that was I didn't feel that it was fair to overlay upon the back of the underground program a pavement management program that we need to put in place in town and make people being assessed for undergrounding bear 100% of that cost. So what we're talking about doing in a pavement management plan is we would literally mill and resurface every single street, whereby all of the years of asphalt overlay are removed, and we now get a proper higher crown with a slope, and we get proper drainage, and we don't have the ponding and the pooling that we get in town because the roads will actually be built in a civil engineered manner. So it's actually in my mind, a better way of doing it, and it's where we would historically have placed that cost anyway.
My mind is taking it out of one pocket and putting it into another pocket and reducing the cost so it won't be so objectionable. But thank you for your explanation.
Okay.
You should have better explanation.
Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. First, are we getting a copy of this presentation? That would be helpful.
Yeah, I guess we could, you mean leave it with, say, Ned, for
Well,
example?
we can put it on our website and.
Okay,
yeah.
that would be fine,
Yeah.
just to make sure we have access to
Plus,
it.
we're recording this event, and that'll also be on our website.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd just like to go back, Tom, to the road work that you took out of the budget. Is that work the town would do anyway?
Yes.
So that is work that we're gonna pay for whether or not we do undergrounding.
Yeah, and
So that's the rationale for not including it in the undergrounding budget. It's gonna happen anyway.
yeah,
So
well, we're gonna
It's not part of the undergrounding choice.
we're gonna request it, but to happen because we think it needs to happen. But the other benefit of keeping it in the capital improvement program is that those costs are end up affecting your property tax rate, and currently property taxes are deductible against your federal income tax. Special assessments are not. So there is a variable there that you have to consider.
And if you do undergrounding, do you have to do this road work, or could you do undergrounding without the road work?
We would have to patch,
But you don't have to do.
but we
the-
don't have to do the
So these are
work.
really separate projects. You can
Right.
do one without the other, either way.
Yeah, that's technically, you're right, yes, that's correct.
And then if I could just comment on the 8-minute outage, I'd remind everybody that that's why you need to do this town-wide. getting your local lines put underground doesn't help you with outages that happen upstream.
Right, that's true, absolutely. Yes, sir.
What's the sequence or timing going to be of planning as you move from each phase? Are you gonna do, if phase one is about to start, will you start planning phase two so the people in phase two will know what?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So it'll be phase by phase as well as.
Correct. It'll be like an assembly line. Once it starts going, while construction's going on in one area, the design in the next is beginning, the communications are beginning. So it'll all have a natural flow
Easement
to it.
acquisition.
Yeah. So everything will be.
I imagine you'll learn from one and
Oh, yeah.
improve as you go along.
That's our hope. That is our hope, yes.
Was there a decision made on the fiber optic situation?
Well, yes and no. I haven't looked at the submittals that came from the request for information process yet, but we know a couple of things. That AT&T has decided that they will convert their system to fiber optic. And the last meeting that I had, was it last week with Comcast? It's all running together. Was they're going to look at tweaking their numbers and seeing if they can do fiber optic as well. They would prefer to do fiber optic because, let's face it, I mean, it could be 100 years or more before these roads are all opened up like this. So it's like
Do
a
it now.
once in a four
Yeah.
generation time span where it's like do it now or just forget about it, because now's the time to do these kind of things. So we're hopeful that at least one is going to provide fiber optic and maybe two. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. 1660?
1660.
Yes. Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you for the presentation. I'm sure many of you know this, but I'm not aware of it. I would like to ask Kevin, you met with all these people and you reviewed the original budget, and you came up with a budget as approximately 30 million in excess. I'm not aware of what the excess was. I only know the difference. I got material that says one is 98.6 and one was 90. And I know what made up those, but I don't know what made up the 120. So perhaps you can tell us what that 120 consisted of before it was reduced to 98.6.
I went over that in detail I think at the February task force meeting, and it wasn't necessarily any extra items. The milling and resurfacing that was spoken about earlier, certainly that was one component of it. Probably the most
12.8.
Yeah, the most significant component of it, and the rest of them were just differences in the other budget line items that were presented previously.
Well, some were taken out totally, weren't they?
Some were taken out totally. The
Besides
only one
that.
that I know that we took out the milling and resurfacing. I don't have any of that information here in front of me. I had, like I said, you could go back to the February task force reporting to hear the comparison and have everything that I relayed onto the task force. I don't have that in my head. But I can tell you that, much of it was just that the line items were just, in our opinion, it was different than the original line items in the original budget.
And is it possible that the peer review will have different line items as well?
It's possible that they could come back with a different opinion.
So we really don't know what our budget is yet.
I have an opinion of what the budget is.
Yeah, you had an opinion about 120 million initially, is that correct?
We had started there, and then we took line items such as paving and moved them to a different budget, so it comes out. And
Well, why do you think the paving was in the first budget if it's not a undergrounding item?
I don't know why the paving was. I didn't develop the original budget.
Mr.
All right,
Bradford?
let's, Ira, maybe you guys could talk afterwards. I'm gonna wind this up. Let's take one more question.
Can you just I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Can you just comment on how Nightingale and La Puerta's cost estimates are compared to actual? Just because that's recent in a lot of homes.
Well, the project's not over, so it's kind of hard to say that it's, the final number.
Today.
But I can tell you this, that Nightingale and La Puerta It's more than just undergrounding. La Puerta's getting new, was it water main, and they're getting a new drainage system.
Yeah.
At the same time, that's not being charged to them because that's part of their taxes that we all pay. But they're not getting the 25% discount because they don't meet the minimum requirements for the discount. And my recollection is the cost for that street is in the order of $30,000 per home for the undergrounding, and I think it's much less than that for the town-wide cost per home. But like I said, the project is not over, so I can't tell you what the final was or is because it's not over.
They
Will
appear
the,
to be
will
on
the
the
three
budget.
of you be available to stay a few minutes afterwards? Because I
Yeah.
think there are a few more questions.
Yes.
We won't let people who have to leave now. So
Okay.
will you please join me in a round of applause?